story of a traveler that was traveling around through the United States looking for a good place to live. And she came across a tornado alley, I think it's called, right? There's that in Oklahoma, that area. And she asked someone there, said, "Is this a healthy place to live?" And the woman said, "Oh, indeed it is. When I first came here, I had to be carried everywhere. I didn't have the strength to talk. I had no hair. I was just a complete relying on people to do everything for me." The person said, "Wow, that's miraculous. Now look at me," she said. "I am full head of hair, walk around, can do whatever I want to do. I'm perfectly healthy and capable, and as you can see, I can talk." The traveler was impressed and said, "How long have you been here?" She said, "Well, I was born here." The thing is that when we are when we're faced often with difficult circumstances, we sometimes want to think about ways that are easy and ways that can get us out of trouble. So oftentimes when we are searching for a good place to live, we want it to be clear of tornadoes, right? And oftentimes you'll hear people say, I live in Lockport, at least we don't have tornadoes here, or at least we don't have poisonous reptiles here. or at least we don't have, this or that. We can put up with a few blizzards as long as we don't have to worry about our house being washed away. Now, Jesus was faced with a group of disciples, right? And they got out on a boat, and they were traveling on the boat. And they got out, we assume, into the middle of some great lake or ocean or waterway, right? And there they sat, and Jesus slowly fell asleep. And he was in the stern of the boat. It's too bad John Wilson isn't here because he could tell me where the stern of the boat is. But he was in the stern of the boat as opposed to the bow of the boat, the starboard of the boat. So he's in the stern of the boat just resting when suddenly a storm arose. Now, it's interesting because in the Gospels, the first three are often called the synoptic Gospels. Matthew, which is the second written. Why it's first in the Bible, we don't know, but Matthew. Mark, which is the oldest Gospel. Luke, which is the Gospel that was written third and is rightfully in the third place. And then John, which is not a synoptic Gospel. It's the fourth Gospel in the Bible, right? And it's the last written of the Gospels. So why they call them the synoptic Gospels, I think only Roger Covell knows, but probably it's because they are three Gospels that are the most similar, the first three Gospels. John, which is much different, is a very theological and spiritual Gospel, talks about God, Jesus in a much more higher view than Mark, Matthew, or Luke. Anyway, the interesting thing is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, this particular parable is found in all three. And each one has a different emphasis. And in one of them, when they use the idea of storm, the actual Greek word is seismos, which I like to say. But if you've ever studied earthquakes, I'm sure most of you have gone to school to study earthquakes, probably have heard about the seismograph. Have you ever heard of the seismograph? Anyway, the Greek word for earthquake, we get words associated with earthquakes. And so in one of the Gospels, what happens is an earthquake takes place. And the storm is not just a storm, but it's an actual tsunami. And so here you have these people on the boat. An earthquake takes place, and this large tsunami comes to crush the boat. And Jesus is sleeping in the front of the boat. Now, when I was a missionary volunteer in Alaska, I spent about 2 months in Alaska in the summertime, and it was beautiful, just gorgeous place to go visit in the summertime. I didn't go in the wintertime, so I can't tell you what it was like that, but in the summertime it was just utterly stunning. And I was about Veronica's age when I went there, and there I was in the former manse of a church way out in the middle of nowhere. And when you say way out in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, you really mean it. The only way to get to way out in the middle of nowhere is to either take a boat or take a plane. And so the only way we were able to get there, we would take these prop planes, and we'd go, and if it was windy, the prop planes would, and you would start to land, and you would land on one of the props, and it would go crash down, and afterwards you would feel a little bit nauseous. But anyway, there I was in this little village, sleeping in the former manse that no longer was the manse because they didn't have a pastor at the time, sleeping on a hard floor in my sleeping bag. And suddenly I heard this banging noise. And there it was, one of my colleagues who I was with, who happened to live in San Francisco, was shaking me awake. Said, "Did you feel it?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" "There was just an earthquake." And I said, "I didn't feel it, but I feel you shaking me." Here's a girl from San Francisco, so excited that we had an earthquake, that she's shaking me awake. and I slept right through it. She told me it was 6.1 on the Richter scale. It was a big earthquake, but in Alaska you don't feel them. At least I didn't. I slept right through it. And so I can imagine Jesus, being shaken awake like I was. Wake up, wake up. There's a terrible tsunami coming in. And him waking up and seeing this enormous wave getting ready to the little rascals, getting ready to crash down and destroy the boat. And then Jesus gets up and does this. Can I have a cup of coffee? I can't do anything without a cup of coffee, right? And, has his cup of coffee, looking as it's coming down, and then says, "Be still." And suddenly, they're in a still calm. And then the disciples who are all around him are going, wiping the tears from their eyes, changing their diapers or whatever they're doing, because they're just absolutely horrified because they saw the fact that they were close to death and doom and destruction. And suddenly Jesus wakes up, says, "Be still," and there's utter calm. And then Jesus, I love Jesus. You all love Jesus too, I would hope. But I love what he has to say. He says this. He says, I like what do they say in the King James? It sounds so formal. Ye of little faith, right? Ye of little faith. You've seen what I've done, ye of little faith, and yet you can't accept the fact that even when death is all around you and you're facing destruction, you can't accept the fact that I can have something to do with the calm of the storm. And that's what he does. He just calms them. Now, it would be nice if we all had our own. There was a song, My Own Personal Jesus. Did you ever hear that song? My Own Personal Jesus. I think it was by who was it by? I can't remember oh gosh, it will come to me. Someone will tell me. Anyway, My Own Personal Jesus. Don't you sometimes wish that you had your own personal Jesus, that you could just, you're in this terrible situation and the waves are crashing around you and everything seems to be utter despair, and then you just say, Jesus, rub the little bottle, and Jesus comes out and says, "Yes, how can I help you?" Sometimes people wish that you could have this own personal Jesus like these disciples to come out and rescue you when you are faced with utter despair. Now, I've heard a lot of platitudes when people are facing difficult times. People will say things like, God will never give me more than I can handle. Have you ever heard that one before? I'm sure you have, right? And you're overburdened with stuff, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is a great gift that God has given me. God will not give me any more than I can handle. And then one more thing piles up, and another thing piles up. And suddenly you realize, what am I doing? God must love me so much that he's given me all these terrible things, and you're thinking to yourself, I don't want to handle this anymore, right? Has that ever happened to you? And you probably have heard other platitudes like, God will provide, right? You go into your kitchen, you open up the door, and you see a bunch of moths coming out, and you're realizing there's nothing to eat, and someone says, God will provide, right? You go in there, what? I have nothing. And sometimes you think, what is going on here? I need my own personal Jesus to help me out here. And I'll tell you what, we each of us do have our own personal Jesus. We have our own personal Jesus. Now, I want to tell you a story about this preacher. His name was Charles Albert Tinley. With a name like that, you knew he was going to be a preacher. Charles Albert Tinley. Now, he was born in 1851. His father was a slave. His mother was free. He died in 1933. He grew up, among slaves and others that were recently freed around the time of the Civil War. And his first job as he came of age was as a janitor in a church. And so he worked as a janitor in the church. But as he was experiencing the wonder and the joy of this church, he started to think, maybe I should be a preacher. Maybe I should accept this role as a preacher. And he started to be just overwhelmed with the feeling that he should be a preacher. Now, here's the janitor coming up and speaking to the minister, saying, "Hey, I would like to be a preacher, and I would like to be a Methodist preacher. Can you help me out?" And the good preacher said, "Absolutely not." So it took him a while to find someone that was willing to mentor him. And interestingly, the person that was willing to mentor him was a rabbi. Can you imagine this? A black African-American, born of a slave father and a free mother, janitor in a church, coming to a rabbi and saying, "You know what? I want to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. Can you help me out?" And imagine what the rabbi must have said. "Yes, I'll be glad to help you out." That's exactly what he did. And so he became a preacher. And eventually he became a bishop. And eventually he actually was called to the very same church where he was a janitor. And eventually that church grew to be one of the largest churches in America with over 10,000 members in a time when before there were mega churches, and there were whites, and there were blacks, and there were Latinos, and there were Asians, all in that church. And he wrote some wonderful hymns about his experience. And one of them is, "We shall overcome." Have you ever heard that song? We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Imagine that song and all the influence it's had on people. He sang that song. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Then he wrote another song. It's called "Stand By Me." No, not the one, "Stand By Me." Not that one, but the other one. The one that says, when storms are raging, stand by me. Stand by me. When the storms of life are raging, stand by me, stand by me. When the world is tossing me like a ship upon the sea, thou who rulest wind and water, stand by me, stand by me. Now, I can imagine who that personal Jesus was. That little genie in the bottle that became the personal Jesus for Reverend Tinley. And I imagine that the first one was his mom and his dad who raised him. And that gave him the fortitude to overcome trials, to overcome difficulties, to overcome challenges, to overcome the pain and the agony of life. I imagine that at one time his mother was able to help him and to assist him and to love him, and became for Reverend Tinley his own personal Jesus. But I imagine that there was another one that came later in life in an indescribable way, a Jewish rabbi who was willing to take him in and teach him about what it meant to be a pastor, even though he himself was a rabbi, and made him into the man that he became. He was his own personal Jesus. Now, I want to tell you that there's probably others out there. There's probably someone sitting in the pew today who could be like your own personal Jesus, there to say, be still and calm the waves of torment around you. Now, the platitudes of God will not give you anything more than you can handle. The platitudes of God will provide, they make absolutely no sense unless there's a hand, unless there's a feet, unless there's a soul, unless there's a heart, unless there's someone out there that loves you and is willing to take their arms and put them around you and say, it's going to be okay, I can carry some of the burdens. There's not going to be any way that you can overcome some of the pains unless there's someone out there to be for you what Jesus was to his disciples. Someone who was willing to take the cross and carry it. Someone who was willing to accept the burdens that Jesus has placed on every single one of them. Every single one of us. And that is to be his very hands, to be his very heart, to be his very feet in the world. All of us have been overwhelmed with trials, haven't we? Some of us may be just infants, and we can be overwhelmed with trials, learning to walk, learning to walk, learning to walk. The heavy head is so heavy compared to the legs that it seems like we are just not meant to walk because. But eventually that kid will come to a corner and they'll pull themselves up, and eventually they'll teeter, but they will walk. I'm telling you, eventually you will walk. You may teeter, you may fall, you may find difficult challenges, but eventually you may find a hand that will be like Jesus' hand, to lift you up, to carry you, to be Jesus, your own personal Jesus. When I think of all the people who have come before me, when I think of all the joy and the gratitude that I feel in my heart, Titus in the graduation real quick. I see Alex is looking at me. Oh, he's looking at his mind. You know, there's some people who have graduated recently from high school, and the very best of them will acknowledge that they didn't get there alone, that they were carried there by the loving arms of someone who cared, whether it be a teacher like David Shampa, whether it be a parent like Holly Gamache, whether it be a grandparent like Diane Howard. Someone has been there to make the way easy. Now, I'll give you a homework assignment. Go and be that person. Go and be that person for someone else. Be the one to lift a person in pain from the darkness. Be the one to comfort someone who's in trial and tribulation. Be the one in the storms of life to say, be still. Be the one to embrace the world. Let the world be embraced by you.